Hello, and welcome to Under the Brim, where we talk about the mindset and motivation of the athlete under the brim. We want to know how do rodeo athletes and traditional sports athletes compare in their preparation, training, competition, and performance in their sports. I am Dr. Shanna Moody. I'm a professor of kinesiology and human performance here at Sul Ross State University, and I like to call myself an athlete wannabe or a fitleet. And I have never competed in rodeo, even though I love the sport and raised a rodeo athlete. So I'm an avid rodeo mom and fan of the sport. So this podcast is giving me the opportunity to bring together my kinesiology background and my former athlete wannabe self with the rodeo life that I currently live. And today I'm excited about the guest that I have on. It's a little bit different perspective of what we've been talking about. And so I have the people that keep our athletes going and keep them in competition. And so I have our head athletic trainer and one of our student athletic trainers here, and I'm going to let them do their formal introductions of themselves. Take it away.
Go ahead.
It's me. So my name is Spot Myers. I'm a senior here at Sul Ross State University. I was a trainer for all 4 years in high school, and I went 2 years at Howard College and finishing up my second year at Sul Ross.
Nice, yes. Nice. I didn't know, I wanted you to introduce yourself because I didn't know which name you wanted me to use to introduce you. So
just know me as Spot.
There we go. Perfect.
Well, I'm Billy Ray Laxton. I'm the Associate AD for Sports Medicine, the head athletic trainer. Been doing it for quite a while. Been at Sul Ross for 5 years and enjoying every minute of it and having a good time.
Yeah. And so the three of us have kind of a unique connection outside of just working at Sul Ross in that we have partnered together on a research study. So Spot, you want to tell us kind of how that, you're the one that instigated it and got it all started. So you want to give us a little background on how that got going?
I mean, I'm the one that troubled you all to get into it.
Yeah, you're the troublemaker.
Yeah, so I stayed out here during the Christmas break, and I was tired of moving pallets at Tractor Supply. And I was like, well, I want to get my personal training going, and I like rodeo. So I'm like, well, let's just do both, and I'll do strength and conditioning for the rodeo team. And so I was getting my personal training certification, and they were like, you got to have a baseline assessment before you do anything about it. You got to know what's going on. And they did an overhead squat assessment along with goniometry. And I was like, well, let's see if there's anything about for rodeo athletes, and there was nothing. And so I kind of looked at Billy, and I was like, hey, let's get this going. What do you think about this? He was like, go for it. And Billy, Jack, Ray threw me to you, and next thing you know, in about a month and a half, we got the whole research going, and we got to get it done.
Yeah, so there's a program called the McNair program that helps undergraduate students get involved in research and sets them up for graduate school applications or future research opportunities or future professional endeavors. And so you want to give a little bit of history about like what your future aspirations are and why the McNair program is going to benefit you, and so why research was important to you in addition to just answering a problem that you thought was interesting.
That was hard for me because all I wanted to do was just do that research and be done. I didn't want to look ahead. I was being lazy. But the McNair programs helped a lot with the grad stuff. It kind of opens up a new door. It's like, because it's nothing like undergrad. It's a whole new level. You got to get applications going. You got to build your resume. You got to you learn to sell yourself to other people. And so with that's kind of helped me go into these boot camps, learning to pay for grad school, learning how to structure your applications, and I'm hoping one day it would help me get into medical school. So definitely a big help from the McNair program. Yeah,
well, that was what I was going to get to. So right now you're currently undergraduate student. You are a kinesiology and human performance major, but your concentration is athletic training, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so then what is the next step for you after you graduate?
So I still got to take some prereqs out of the way, organic chem and biochem. So
lots of science.
Lots of science.
Yeah, offer up your prayers for slide.
But hopefully by next May or the May after, I'm hoping to kind of get my first round in for medical school. So we're praying on that.
What do you have a goal school that you're trying to get into?
So I really like UNT's Dr. Osteopathic, and then Texas Tech. Sadly, I used to go for A&M, but I like their program as well as
Guns Up,
especially University of Mexico, because those three also all have rural programs. And with Rodeo, I like the rural medicine idea, and I like working with that population a lot more.
Okay. So let's go back to the research. So you found a problem that there was no answer for, right? Like when you started looking into it, there was no research on rodeo athletes. Virtually nothing exists out there at any level, right? So whether it's professional, collegiate, or anything at all, right?
Nothing published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a few things in the works, but really nothing formally published, right?
Nothing formally, no.
Yeah, not a lot about injuries or baseline data or much, really.
There was an article, I think he says Mayers instead of Myers. He spells it with an E, not an A. But he did a rodeo description of injuries, I think back in the 90s.
Okay.
And it was a pretty good study. And that was about the only thing I could find really on rodeo athletes other than just abstracts and nothing to submit behind it.
Okay. So this fell in line with what you were kind of interested in with personal training, but also tied into athletic training as well, what you were learning in your coursework?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you explain a little bit about like the overhead assessment and the goniometry measurements and how it relates to athletic training and why it's important, Laxton?
Yeah. Okay. So with the overhead squat, we're looking at several factors, mainly the muscle imbalance, because they will lose their balance if they don't have a good posture or a good quad and versus hamstring set. And in the goniometry part of it, we were looking for, the amount of range of motion. Somebody that's limited in range of motion may have an injury that they're not dealing with or not dealing with very well, or it may show some predisposing factors to an injury. Mainly for the lower body, and that was his big deal. And so he was looking for heel lift off versus going into a valgus position when you're coming back up out of that squat. And he did a really good job. We got a whole team. We were able to do the rodeo team, mostly. I would think we did all the women and most of the guys, and knocked it out fairly well. And for our athletic training, we got to use the goniometer and use it in just more than just ankle and knee. We were doing the hip, internal and external rotation, and so those sometimes don't always get used. We eye them instead of actually measuring them. So I think it was a really good, healthy activity for us.
So it was a really cool partnership between something you were teaching in classwork, kinesiology, and something that is useful for athletic training, and then bringing in the rodeo team who isn't getting a lot of research done about them or support in this area for the most part around the country, not specifically here, but just around the country in general. So it was kind of a unique opportunity to bring all three of those groups together. So you got a whole class involved, right, to help do the measurements.
The whole staff. We even got our assistants, all the students. They were doing something at some station.
Yeah.
Greatly thankful for all of them that came to help. That would suck doing that all by myself.
But Billy, so is this common in other sports? So overhead squat assessments, goniometry measurements. Do you think there's research baseline assessments? Like, is this used more commonly in other areas?
Yes, especially in your jumpers, whether it's track and field or your basketball players, especially women's basketball players. This is a standard assessment for lower body. It gives you kind of a clue on their not only flexibility but their strength, and there is a correlation in not having enough strength versus tearing ACLs. There are people who are very, very strong and still tear their ACL, but definitely if there is a lower quadrant weakness, there's a greater chance.
As someone who has torn both ACLs, right and left, and had both surgeries, one in high school and one in adulthood, I am like, where were you people before I tore both of them, right? Like, where was this at? So that's really interesting. Okay, so then so for somebody who is like, y'all are talking about overhead squat assessment and goniometry, and I have no idea what that is. Spot, can you give us a breakdown of what those are? Like, so if I'm listening and I want to check to see if I have any problems, and how could I do the overhead squat? What would I do?
So with the overhead squat, it's basically a full body overview. We just focus on the lower body, and what you do is you have them standing pretty much shoulder width apart, second toe pointing forward, arms in the air, and you just squat. Ideally chair depth. And what we're doing is we're looking for compensations. Do their knees go in? Do they favor one side over the other when they're squatting with their hips?
Okay, so if you're listening right now, I hope you're standing in front of the mirror doing this as Spot is describing it, right? So standing in front of a full-length mirror right now, arms overhead, feet hip-width apart, and watching yourself squat.
You just squat. And so things we're looking for, like, do your heels come up? Do your toes turn down? All these little things tell us what type of muscle dysfunctions are there. and not only what muscles are underactive but overactive.
So when he says dysfunction, don't think we're calling you like messed up or anything.
No,
we're just
you're not.
saying that like maybe one muscle group is tighter than the other, one more muscle group is more flexible. You just have dominance in one area than the other.
Right, which is not a bad thing, but it just kind of helps us. We want to be balanced out. Is what we
Yeah.
want to do. That's the idea.
Yeah. So there is like an exact ratio of like quadricep strength to hamstring strength that is ideal to improve performance and limit injury, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did I say that correctly? Okay.
In a way.
Yeah,
In a way.
no, I would agree with her. Yeah,
I see Billy shaking his head.
no. It's just like you describe. Depending on how much really foot pounds you can generate with your lower body, you'd like to have your quadriceps about 80% of that foot pounds individually, and the hamstrings closer around, it used to be like 60, but maybe about 75% of that foot pounds individually. And that way you can show a good ratio of hamstring to quad. And those many times, especially in our athletes, we're about to find out in rodeo athletes, it's the converse of that the quads are really, really strong and the hamstrings aren't, and that imbalance can lead to just muscle tears or problems with the knee.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of times that they just think that their hamstrings are tight, and they don't necessarily realize that maybe they're actually weak, right?
Exactly the point. Exactly.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
okay. So tell me a little bit about the results that you found. So we had more women, which is common in research, right? Women are more likely to participate in research than men in stereotypically across the country, so in all areas. But we had more women than men participate. But what were your findings?
So we found that they were movement compromised in a way, and especially in the hip. And with hamstring flexibility. That was the biggest deal. With the overhead squat, if I remember correctly, their toes turned out more, and we had a lot of knee valgus going in. There are
So imagine that with rodeo. You probably think about the way that a cowboy walks, right? They're all walking with their toes turned out, and especially like anybody that's riding a horse, you're trying to spur a horse. So the way to do that is to turn your toes out.
Right.
So you would assume that, right? Like
that makes sense.
That makes sense, and it matches your hypothesis, right?
Right.
And then what was the other one that the knees turn in? And then so in anybody that's trying to hold on to a horse, you're going to hold on with your knees, not with your feet. So again,
Right.
that would make sense.
Mm-hmm. And then a lot of them, we had a lot of lumbo-pelvic dysfunction. So like a lot of them favored one side over the other. And with women, they did the Instagram pose where they had anterior pelvic tilt. And what was cool out of all the 6 men that we had, they all presented posterior pelvic tilt, which was interesting because it kind of shows that they're dominant in their posterior chain just a little bit.
Okay, wait. So can you explain? Okay, so you called it the Instagram pose. So can you explain what anterior pelvic tilt is?
Well, I'm not going to show you, but it's basically where you're rocking your butt backwards and kind of arching your back.
Okay, so yeah, so think about if a girl was trying to pose on Instagram and make her booty look lifted and a little more full, and she would arch her back and lift her hips, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's anterior pelvic tilt. Mm-hmm. So women were more dominant in that way, or more tilted that way.
Yes.
Okay, and so then what were the men?
Men were just the exact opposite.
Okay, so more tail tucked under.
Tail tucked under, yeah.
Yes. Yes, which from teaching yoga to all the athletes, that's what I see too. I have a really hard time getting the male athletes into an anterior pelvic tilt, just seated in a seated position to try to just sit down on the floor with the legs out. Like, it's very challenging for them to just sit in any kind of, even just neutral. I can't even get them from posterior to neutral, let alone anterior, right?
Yeah, it's a postural thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so anything else from the findings that you want to point out that you noticed?
No, I can't think off the top of my head at the moment.
Okay.
Coffee hadn't settled quite in, but that's the main. That's the main.
It's
gist
morning
with
here
it,
and it's
yeah.
raining and it's a little cool for us. Mm-hmm. We're all still trying to get woke up.
But yeah, that's pretty much the main deal. Where a lot of lumbo-pelvic the tightness or favorability, and hamstrings were very, very tight. So
okay,
those are the big findings.
So what would you recommend? So somebody who has tight hamstrings, do they need to focus more on stretching their hamstrings like we just talked about, or strengthening their hamstrings, or is it a combination of both?
Kind of that mix and play, a combination of both. I'd more say, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now what do we do with these findings?
Well,
like what would be your advice based on what you found, your recommendations? How do we use this?
So what I want to do is get in with our coach, kind of say, hey, this is what we found, get you and Billy along with it. Like, all right, let's think of some ideas to kind of help get them to moving better. So stretching is good. We want to focus on kind of strengthen that area, but also like with stretching, maybe doing some more dynamic work. So basically getting the muscle warmed up and loosened up through movement, not really through static. That'll kind of keep their strength there more.
That's the challenge that I'm finding right now in yoga, and that they all want the deep stretching, and they think that it's their hip flexors are really tight, but sometimes I think it's that their hip flexors are weaker, and they want the very relaxing, just passive stretching, when really we need more mobility work than flexibility work. Yeah, so trying to figure out how to get them involved in both and want to do both. Yeah. All right. So are you enjoying the research? Is it what you thought it was going to be? Like, are you enjoying working with the rodeo athletes?
That was actually fun because I was proven wrong. That's pretty hard to swallow, but it was fun figuring out why I was wrong. Like, I thought knees valgus and heel rise are going to be the biggest thing ever. And while the knees valgus was kind of there, I was completely wrong with the heels. And they actually did really well with their hip flexor, hip extension, and all that. So a lot of the measurements that we got really kind of blew me away. I was not expecting it, which is awesome. I get to learn more about it, and it keeps me going.
Yeah, research is a humbling thing, and that you have to accept that being wrong can be good, and that it does teach you, you know, just like losses in sports, right? I mean, they humble you, but they make you to just exactly what you said, crave wanting to learn more and do more and go back and be better the next time. So have you been involved in a lot of research, Billy, or is this?
Well, yeah, you know, especially when I was younger. Now in my career, it's usually research review. Somebody will call you up, hey, I'm doing this. What do you think? And so I get to read a little bit and, you know, and try to bring in some empirical type information and try to give them, you know, a good 2 cents, if you will. And then, but it's usually, when I'm involved, it's usually through the student activity now. And try to be, you know, mentor, try to help them set it up, try not to make the project too big, you know, because they go crazy trying to we want to measure everything. No, we don't. We want to try to be exact so we can focus and then relate it to the big picture.
Why couldn't you have been my dissertation chair? I went to him with this one tiny little thing, and he was like, no, let's measure everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I went from, I just want to have a 75-page dissertation to, oh, wait, you're going to have a 350-page dissertation.
Well, it made you a better person.
It's funny you said that, because I went to him, I was like, let's do everything, lower body and upper body. And he's like, whoa.
Yeah.
You know how long it's going to take just to do ankles and then the knee? And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're kind of right. Then you got to do the squat. I'm like, all right, we'll do lower body.
Yeah, so we wanted to focus and see how these factors fit into the big picture, and he did a great job. So I'm really pleased with what he got, and it is a doorstep activity. So it's, you know, he's now opening the door, and then, you know, as a graduate study and maybe even med school, that these things will be paying off for him, you know, when he starts reviewing or maybe doing his own research as it comes to him.
Yeah, well, and just what you said, that's why it's important to be part of a team, so that everybody, you know, so that we can moderate the ideas and make sure that we're getting all the ideas out there and that they're flowing correctly, and that we put a concise idea together and test it properly. And, you know, and so, Spot, when you were doing your initial research to try to put this together to get your initial review, to be able to get approval to do the research, you had to base this on traditional sport athletes, right? Like, because there wasn't anything, you know, on range of motion and overhead squat assessment on rodeo athletes. So your initial data, like when you were looking for initial studies to base the kind of the plan on how we were going to format this research, you had to base it on traditional sports athletes, right?
Correct, yeah.
And then kind of some of your comparisons to norms were based on traditional sport athletes, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So how would you say, like, can you, I don't know, it's been a while since you've looked at it, but what would you say about like how rodeo athletes compare to traditional sports athletes and their like range of motion and their competencies or compensations?
It's been a while since I've looked at that one. I believe with one study that was going off, it was actually done by an athletic trainer, and they did their whole athletic department. And I think the biggest one was heel rising with them.
Okay.
For us, that was not the case.
Okay.
While we did lack a lot of dorsiflexion in the goniometry, so pulling your toes to you, that actually wasn't the case. I think knees out was more common with a lot of their football athletes, and I think it was the exact opposite with their field sports like soccer and baseball. I think that was different. But that's the only thing I can recall right now, because it's just been about a year since I've looked at that.
Yeah. And so then you and I had talked about that, possibly even expanding the study to include the entire Southwest region of rodeo as a future possibility, depending on how things go.
That is a dream of mine right now, yes.
Yeah, but you're a little overwhelmed with science classes right now.
Oh, genetics, you gotta love it.
Yeah, so there's a possibility that we could expand this. So if you're listening to this and you're curious about your own overhead squat assessment or your own range of motion measurements, talk to your athletic training department at your college if you're a collegiate rodeo athlete. And if you're interested in our study, then maybe get in contact with one of us and we could see about working with your school to include your school in our study.
Absolutely.
But you've also parlayed this into some other projects as well. So as part of the McNair project that we talked about, you've been able to present this research at a bunch of different conferences, correct?
Oh,
so
yes,
what's that experience been like, being an athletic trainer at a research conference where most everybody else is presenting on completely different topics, nothing related to sports or fitness or rodeo or kinesiology?
I think the biggest thing when I first did it was cool topic, but y'all should really see my heart rate right now. That was the bigger takeaway. But it was an experience. I get to kind of talk. The first one I did was Doc Spoon's or Fort Davis Sports Medicine Clinic. And I got kind of talk the jargon to kind of all of these medical professionals, and I got to relate to it, and we got to get ideas and share them. And then I kind of made more confident to go to places like Baylor, for instance, where I did my research, and I kind of got to make it more fun and wild. And here at the school, our TOEFL research. So that all these kind of help prepare me to be a better speaker, but also to be kind of more fun with it rather than so tight about it, if that makes sense.
Well, and tell them your fun fact about why it's cool to do rodeo, to be one of the first people to do rodeo research on collegiate athletes.
Well, this is literally rodeo country. The first rodeo ever was in Pecos, Texas, and then the NRA college rodeo started here in Alpine. So it's fitting for home to start this research here.
Yeah, so Sul Ross is the home of collegiate rodeo. So we're, the founders of the Collegiate Rodeo Association. So yeah, so it's very fitting that we be the, forefront of collegiate rodeo research.
Right.
So then you've also met someone through your research that has now got you into where you're able to kind of maybe get your name on some professional rodeo athlete research, right?
Dr. Jake Miller, he's a MD sports medicine, world medicine guy up in South Dakota, yes.
Yeah, so he's really interested in this topic too of doing research about professional rodeo athletes and seeing if their habits influence their performance and looking at even their winnings as well, right?
Yeah.
So a little different than what you're doing, but kind of interesting how when you start something, it makes connections and grows your network. And I think that's one of the things in college, Billy, that we're always working on is our students making connections, and that who really does make a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about working with the rodeo athletes and the research that's happened, but tell me a little bit about y'all's background with sports. Did either of you play sports growing up?
I mean, I did powerlifting, and I tried to be a basketball player, but apparently in high school you have to make the team to play. But
sort of goes like that.
But I did powerlifting for about 3 or 4 years, and kind of settled down. It's hard to be consistent, but that's pretty much my background with sports.
What was your favorite lift?
Oh, deadlift, 100%.
Yeah?
I almost had a 4-time bodyweight deadlift, so.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
I'm too tall and lanky for deadlift.
Oh, just if you pull it fast enough, you ain't got to worry about that.
And so you liked basketball, but just didn't quite make the cut.
Yeah, coach didn't think I was good enough.
Oh, you thought you were just the coach didn't.
Exactly.
Dang coaches. Okay. And what about you, Billy Ray?
Yeah, I was a youth athlete, junior high athlete, and high school athlete, and I started seeing the picture come in that maybe that was going to be it for me as an athlete. I did like to run and whatnot, but athletics was so infectious to me that I wanted to figure out how I could be a part of it, and my niche was taking care of athletes, and so it started happening for me, and it was a God-given gift that just was easy to make a part of my life. Athletics just took me from coast to coast and took me to the Olympics, and I've been very blessed. My family has both of my sons have been student trainers for me, and my wife has helped me take care of some sick kids over the years, and so this was something that just became a part of my life, and it was because athletics gave me that opportunity, and that desire. I wanted to be a part of it, and that's how it worked out for me. So.
Yeah, well, I call myself a Jill of all trades because when I started into kinesiology, it was because I tore my ACL. That's actually what got me started in the field. I went through physical therapy and I thought, oh, this is the coolest thing. I want to be a therapist. And then I was like, oh, wait, it might be neater to work with the athletes like sooner rather than after surgery. And so I thought I went into athletic training. I took a couple of athletic training classes and I thought this was really cool. And then I told my boyfriend that I was going to be an athletic trainer and he was like, hey, listen, I don't think that we're going to work out if you start traveling with the football team every weekend and you spend every evening on the sidelines with them. I don't think that we're going to make it. And being the young, influential, 18, 19-year-old that I was like, oh, okay, you're right. So I found fitness, but luckily it all works out the way that it's supposed to, right? So I know just enough, a little bit about everything to maybe sort of talk about it, but not enough to actually do it. So don't come to me for any athletic training or physical therapy advice.
Go to Billy.
But kind of like you said, I always wanted to be an athlete and it was infectious to be around that environment, but, didn't have the skills and abilities. It sounds like maybe we were all kind of in that boat. But you mentioned something that I want to talk to you about because I still to this day tell people that I'm going to be an Olympic athlete.
Boom.
And it might be that I'm the fittest 99-year-old senior Olympic athlete, but I feel like at 99, surely I can be fitter or more athletic than some other 99-year-old, right? Like that's my goal right now. I have pretty good genetics. My great-grandmother lived to be 102, so I have pretty good genetics, and she was independent all the way up to 102, still lived at home by herself. So I feel like I can be fitter than some other 102-year-old.
Why not?
Yeah. So you mentioned that sports had taken you to the Olympics, so tell me about that.
Okay, it was a deal where I did the 96 Olympics, not as an Olympian athlete, it was as in sports medicine, and so I spent in Atlanta, Georgia, hot Atlanta.
Yes, I was there.
Yeah, I was there for 47 days, did all the pre-camps, was a host athletic trainer with the ACOG organization and covered everything from Olympic baseball to I was at the practice track every day, Stone Mountain for tennis, and then went to the Olympic track for about 3 days and covered those events that were pretty fun. The 800 meters, I remember seeing a young lady, Diane Modal, she ran for Great Britain, and she actually tore her, everybody says, I tore my ham. No, this young lady tore her hamstring, and her bicep femoris was in two, had a big old lump, and she tore it, didn't sprain it. And so anyways, those allowed me to be more adventurous in my career and led to a lot of fun stuff. And then I did the 04 Olympic time trials in Sacramento and the pre-camp at Chula Vista. I was on my way to maybe qualifying for the 04 Athens, but my wife had a young baby boy that was my son, and I just couldn't, I couldn't be away from home that much, and I wanted to stay there. So it was a pretty good deal, and I've done a lot of extended stuff in pro athletics, so mainly rodeo and arena football also.
Oh, wow,
and so those things were just, gravy on the potatoes or the cherry on the sundae, whatever you want to, because they were fun, and it lent itself to be around some pretty unique people. So yeah.
Okay, you just talked about some of the most amazing experiences that people would kill to have in their career, to work with professional athletics and to work with the Olympics and to work with pro rodeo athletes. But the smile that you got on your face when you talked about your son, you just lit up. Like, it was amazing. So
family has always been very, very important, and but it was a blessing. This career has been a blessing to my family because they got to do stuff. It was not every 11-year-old gets to get on a charter flight to go with a college football team to another state in Oregon and cover a football game, being a water boy, and come back and eat like a king and all that kind of stuff. He just had a great time, And my oldest son, he has a state finalist championship ring, from his time at John Tyler High School. So
that's awesome. You just said Waterboy, though, and now I can't get Adam Sandler out of my head. The movie.
Bobby Boucher.
Better.
So you've had some really amazing experiences. What would be, I think the more I talk to you, the more I feel like Sul Ross is blessed to have your diverse experience here working with our athletes and teaching our students. So what would you say has been the, what advice would you have to, people that want to do what you do, that want to work in athletic training, to be able to get into some of those key roles and be able
sure.
to...
Well, it's like anything. You got to jump in with both feet. Be willing to learn and communicate and meet people. A lot of kids, they worry about life balance, and life balance is something that is important, especially whenever you're talking about maybe burnout or something like that. But this is your life, okay? This is your career. This is what you want to be. So jump in and do it. And things usually tend to work out. And for my experiences, my whole family got to be a part of it, and that made it even more richer. So very, very fortunate. Very fortunate.
So I'm not ignoring you, Spot. Come back to you in just a minute. But
Yeah,
I want to ask.
Fine over here.
Every time I talk to you, Billy, I learn more about you. So I want to know, from all those diverse, you've worked with Justin Sports Medicine teams.
Yes.
So you've worked in pro rodeo. You've been to the Olympics. You said you worked with arena football. You've worked at collegiate athletic level. What's been the craziest injury you've ever seen happen?
Okay, it doesn't sound like a lot, but this young man dislocated his knee and had a perineal nerve lesion that took about 5 years to recover from, and it was the worst injury I've seen. But it really projected his life in a totally different way that he had planned on. We were in Tyler, Texas, and just right across the border in Louisiana, in Shreveport, is Barksdale Air Force Base, and that's where the A-10 Warthog planes are. And at the time, there was a guy named Jeff Dutton that played for the Dallas Cowboys that had been a former A-10 pilot. So this was all on his mind. And whenever this happened, it took that off because he couldn't pass the physical for the Air Force, and everything turned out okay, but his trajectory of life changed. So it was a life-changing injury, and I often put that down because I've had a couple C2 fractures. I've had some other knee dislocations that, they were really, really bad, but I saw this because it happened to him as a younger high schooler, and I saw how that changed his life. And however, things did turn out very well for him, and his name was Amon-Ra Daniels. We called him Ra-Ra, and he was that type of person. And he really came to the table and turned out to be a great human being. So, but things do happen like that, and I just remember the impact it had on my life, how it changed his.
So, Spot, you've been working in athletic training. You said you were doing it in high school. You did it in Howard College before you came here, and now at Sul Ross. So what about you? What's the worst injury you've seen so far?
Ooh. We were at state for soccer back in 17, and it was a semifinals game. And he went to go kick the ball, and his foot got caught in the turf, and he had both a tib and a fib fracture and a dislocated ankle.
So his leg went forward, but his foot didn't.
Right, so
Okay.
his toes were pointing the whole wrong way.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably the worst one I've seen. That was one time I've seen a splint get put on. Probably the second one's probably the spine board. We had an athlete get thrown down, and the bull stepped on him, actually split his helmet in half. And I was actually here in Alpine at a rodeo and got him spine board and got him sent off. So those are probably the big two for me that really made an impact so far.
So as a young trainer being involved in those, how, did you respond in the way that you thought you would?
The first one at the soccer game, no. I was only a sophomore in high school, so I was still learning taping ankles. But with the spine board one, I think I reacted pretty well. I've always been one to kind of run to it rather than away. I got a mall shooting story about that. Everyone's running away, and I'm like, who is it?
There's a shooter. Let me run at them. That sounds like a smart idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to talk about that.
Yeah, this podcast. But no, as time's gone on, I've seen stuff, and I've learned to react a lot better and quicker because I want to be sure they're okay and get them to the right place to get their care handled. So I think I've evolved really well as a student to do that.
So as someone who is the same age as our students, you're in the trenches because you're working as a student athletic trainer, correct? Is that the correct way to say it?
Yes.
Okay, so because in our program you are I never say it correctly, Billy Ray. How do you say our program?
We're an apprenticeship program, for
Okay.
the state of Texas.
Okay.
For licensure.
Okay, so you're working toward your licensure. So you have to get 1,800 hours of experience
Yes, ma'am.
during your undergrad program to sit for your licensure exam, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you have to study and pass the exam in addition to the 1,800 hours.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so there's a lot of hours that goes into this. So you're putting in a lot of time in addition to taking the classes and studying for the exam and doing all the things. So you're putting in the hours, and so you're around the athletes. And right now here at Sul Ross, we treat both of our traditional sport athletes and our rodeo athletes, correct?
Yes.
So you'll offer services to all of them. So again, you're the same age as these athletes that are coming in for treatments that you're on the sidelines, waiting to assist as they need it. So what's it like to treat them? Do you see differences in the traditional athletes and the rodeo athletes, or like, do you feel like they act differently around you than they do around Mr. Laxton? Like,
Absolutely. They throw me under the bus with Mr. Laxton. Did you feel a pop? No, sir. Did you feel a pop? Yeah, I did. He always kind of gives me a look. I'm like, man, what's going on here? If we're asking about the differences in how they treat it, it's kind of the same in a way with both traditional and non-traditional. They all kind of go through those same 5 stages of healing mentally, but they kind of do it in their own way. I think with the cowboy pride, that's more common. They're hurt, they're going to hide it more, and they're not going to come to you usually until it's really bad. With traditional athletes, it can be the same, but I think they usually give in a little bit more. But some people kind of want to be pulled out, while some don't. And typically with the rodeo athletes, they're paying their own money, their own fees out of their own pocket with all these expenses. They don't want to be pulled out because that's their investment in their life.
well, and the other thing I would see too is that they don't have the rigorous day-to-day practices and coaches grinding on them in the same way. Like my football players that are in IC in class who are like, okay, we have to go sit and watch game film for 3 hours. We have to go be on the field for 2 hours. We have to do conditioning for 2 hours. Like the rodeo team doesn't have that same, it's their own schedule and their own itinerary. Like if they want to practice, it's up to them. CJ has a schedule for them, but it's not the same physical rigor, I would say, that football is, right?
Yeah. I would say the rigors are a bit different, so it's kind of hard to practice 24/7.
Right.
You can only ride so many 2,000-pound animals at one time.
Yeah, definitely. Don't take that to mean that I'm undermining rodeo at all. That it's definitely physically rigorous. The actual competition is, but the practice is different, right?
Yeah.
The physical nature of the practice is very different. And so I think sometimes I have seen in my class, at least, some of our traditional sports athletes who are like, oh, I have a runny nose, I can't practice today. But it's not that they don't love the sport and they don't want to play the sport. It's just that the rigor of practice can be very wearing on you, right? Where they still want to play in the game and they still want to compete. It's just the rigor of practice. Whereas what you said about the rodeo athletes are like, it's my money. Like I'm going to compete with my leg hanging off of my body, like barely attached, right? Like because,
I hope not, but yes.
And I can't, as a rodeo athlete, you're competing for your own individual, even though you're part of a team, it's still an individual competition, whereas if the football team, if one player sits out, the whole team can still play. So it's a little bit different. Like our quarterback got hurt just recently, and our team is still having to play without our main quarterback starting. So,
yep, that's right. I would agree with him. Rodeo people have always been a little stoic and maybe deny, and then they're the first ones to bargain in dealing with all this. But they've also made a pretty good shift in the way they think, because they want to prolong their careers, and they want to be able to be a active participant at a high level, or the highest level they can, as long as they can. So they see that picture and they see what we do. So, but yeah, with that being said, I think it's changed a little bit, but what he said traditionally, I think, is true.
Yeah. So you talked about those stages. So, some of those stages are like they deny that there's an injury, and then they get angry about it, and then they try to bargain their way out of it, and then
they come around.
They come to some acceptance eventually, right? Yeah.
Hopefully.
So are they ever wimps about the treatment, right? Because sometimes treatment can be painful, right? Sitting in an ice bath can be painful, and going, I remember from physical therapy, some of those things can be really painful. So are they ever like, ooh, that hurts, I don't want to do that?
Yeah. Back in high school, we had this sign. Red Gaines put it up saying, no whining in the training room. It works sometimes.
I was going to say that's virtually impossible, right? Like,
Oh my.
But I mean, yeah, they're going to be like, yeah, this hurts after a while. But pain's kind of your scale when you're doing it. Like, if it really, really hurts, obviously, we don't need to be doing that.
right.
But sometimes Marines, pain's weakness to the body sometimes, and really going through that process and getting better over time, that's the big thing. And once they kind of see that, they're like, oh, let's keep going. And then the mentality kicks in and things start becoming a lot easier for them, I think.
Okay, so you just brought up an interesting quote, pain is weakness leaving the body. So from a trainer's perspective, what would you tell our audience about that quote?
Well, if it's keeping you up at night, do not follow that quote. Basically, rubbing some dirt on it sometimes, like, okay. But if it's really causing you problems to where you can't do your job, then that's when you kind of throw that mentality away and really get some help. I probably opened a can of worms just saying that quote.
Oh, no. I mean, the one that always kind of, if you're feeling pain, you're alive, okay? So, the things could be worse. So, and I get, the mentality, but when it comes to healing, pain can be your friend. And so when it gets hard or when it's painful, if you're going about a safe regimen and you have informed the patient why we're doing this, things kind of get put in perspective, and they're willing to accept some discomfort and such. But he is right. If it's too painful, too difficult, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. It's just common sense, right?
Yeah.
So what do you see with the athletes after injury when they have to return to the sport? So let's say they've had a pretty severe injury. They've had to have a treatment or a surgery or sit out for a while to heal. And then when they go back, what are you seeing with that? What's their mindset like? Do you see any difference again between the traditional athlete and the rodeo athlete?
No, I don't think so. There is always that apprehension, whether a re-injury or can I do it again like I used to do it, whatever that feeling is. So that's kind of universal. It is a deal where, in competitive collision sports or heavy contact sports, you're probably having to do it more than once. Whereas in rodeo, if you can get on that bull or get on that horse and do your thing at least once, it's such a big confidence builder. And that's why you hear, well, just get back, dust yourself off, get back on. And if you can just do it one more time and have some success, then it really feeds. Whereas in the arena of a basketball or even football, it's just like every time that one thing happened that you got hurt doing, it was a little flinch, and it's just human nature. And I think you have to build the confidence in their skills before they even get back to a return to play. So that's usually your end of your secondary healing and, much of your tertiary healing, that they're really getting that confidence back.
Yeah, I totally agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So in talking about, again, the comparison between the traditional athlete and the rodeo athlete, what are we seeing with concussions these days? That's such a, hot topic in both arenas right now. So how are our athletes dealing with that, and what advice do you have for people listening, maybe either if they've had a concussion or haven't had one yet, what advice do you have?
If they're in doubt, hold themselves out. Okay,
Right.
It's that simple. I think the
Wait, did you mean to rhyme there?
yeah, well, it is a saying. Cliches are true sometimes.
When in doubt, hold yourself out. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a situation where it's about tracking. So the care in secondary school and collegiate and even in pro, with the situation with the Miami Dolphins recently, the level of care and tracking and observation is way higher. In rodeo, especially in smaller pro rodeo, that you can compete in this rodeo, go half across the country and compete in another rodeo, and no one even knew you had any type of problem the rodeo before. And it's that easy because there's no tracking, there's no actual oversight, if you will. Whereas in collegiate athletics, secondary athletics, and in the pros especially, there is a lot of tracking. So I think it's harder to hide a concussion at those traditional sports, whereas in rodeo, it can be quite easy, to be honest with you. But now rodeo athletes, to their credit, have now seen the light, and many will self-report. That's very unusual, especially on the male side. But they're starting to report, and that is a big benefit to them and to the people who are trying to take care of them.
What do you think about like the new PBR league that they've started? Have y'all seen that they have started PBR competition as a team?
I love that.
So I would say, from what you just said, that maybe that's going to be something that could be helpful, because now there's an actual coach, there's some management and some tracking and some statistics, and
Truly.
Hopefully, if you're part of a team, then someone wants to make sure that you're healthy and they're keeping up with what's going on with you. So maybe that does start some of that reporting and sharing of records that you mentioned.
Keeping each other accountable.
Yeah. Well, got to speak briefly with Tuff Hederman about all this, and he's an alumni from here. And it was all about just take more ibuprofen, or more, at the time, aspirin. Take more aspirin, And there was Motrin and Nuprin had just came out, so they were getting used to the idea of just like, if your head hurts, just take more medicine. And now, if you were to talk to him, and it's like, he's a producer. He has these events. He does all the media to it and everything. And the first thing that comes out of his mouth is like, we've always had to increase safety. Nobody wants to see anybody get hurt. And so these things are coming from him, now older and wiser, But it is a deal where the science is finally catching up with the rodeo athletes, especially the bull riders. So,
yeah. Awesome. So what is the protocol here at Sul Ross if you have an athlete with a concussion?
Definitely get them through physician care. We got to have the physician sign off, and basically we get them through the symptoms, and then we can start doing return to play once they are symptom free.
And you'll have a specific return to play protocol, right, that they have to check off and go through before they're allowed?
Yes, ma'am.
And then they have to get cleared by y'all and go through the coaches, like it has to be approved, like the coaches have to know that they've been cleared by you before they can play, right?
That's true. Yeah, and we're real tight with our medical team, and so many times they'll just say, well, did they fully complete it, and this staged protocol? And when we're able to report, they usually will just sign off on it. And there's been some times where we've had kids have to go in and get maybe a third visit with the doctor, and just to make double sure. But it came old hat, if you will, in an established protocol, and it has extended into cheerleading and into rodeo. So these people understand, and it really has a lot to do with how well they set it up in the public schools, in the secondary school setting. That really helps us, because everybody's unfortunately have either seen it or had one by the time they get here, so they understand that they have to do this. So it's pretty regulated, I think.
Well, I want to be mindful. I know Spot and I both have to go to class. So I want to wrap it up. The last thing I want to ask is, what piece of advice do you have as athletic trainers for anyone listening who's either a traditional sports athlete or an rodeo athlete, how, in order to either keep themselves safe to prevent injuries or to help them better recover from an injury, either physically or mentally, what is your advice for them?
Take care of your body and do little things first. Move around more. If rodeo athletes are on the road, you're on the road 24/7, maybe 14 hours a day. Get out, stretch, and just move around. And after that, maybe start going to the gym. Doing some stuff like that, and then nutrition. But also learn to have fun. Don't make it such a job sometimes. Think about other things, and have that life balance, if you will, in a way. But really just take care of that physical and mental aspect. Have fun doing it, and just move around, take care of your body.
I totally agree, and especially on the nutrition, because not only does it help you prepare, but it helps you recover. And then the old adage I go by, especially in athletics, is you're only as happy as your feet are. So take care of yourself. So take care of your feet first, and then everything else will follow along.
Yeah. I love that old piece of advice about John Wooden, how he would start with his athletes by teaching them to tie their shoes. And I had never heard you say that until I was reading your report on your interview with him about you're only as happy as your feet are. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Can you explain to the listeners a little bit more about that?
Oh, his self-experience. I was trying to play basketball. I had just gotten myself in a position where I was on the varsity in Sonora, Texas, and I had terrible blisters, and I was being hard-headed, and I got to where I couldn't even move, and I went right down that and never recovered from that lineup change, and it was one of those deals where I just, you're only as happy as your feet are, and so might as well take care of them, and if I had just been mindful, I would have probably been able to withstand some of the practices better and having a little bit more fun, like he said, because I was miserable. So that's where I got that from.
I love it. I've heard be where your feet are, but I've never heard you're only as happy as your feet are. So
that's right.
I like it. I don't think that I adhere to that because I love to wear high heels. So sorry. Sorry, feet.
That may be a test question for the AT students here. Just remember that.
Well, one other thing that I've heard y'all say in regard to going through the athletic training process is trust the process. And I know that was something that was really important to y'all too, to remind the athletes of, like you may not understand, you may not feel like this is going to work, or that, you're not getting healed instantly, but you have to stick with it and you have to trust the process.
Exactly.
So, yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I would love to sit back down with you again and go back through the last pieces of advice that you just gave and talk more in depth about the being more active throughout your day, proper warm-ups, proper cool-downs, the nutrition aspect of it, the sleep aspect of it. So maybe we can do another episode at a later time and talk about those things, because I think that's so important, and we haven't even gotten to scratch the surface with that topic yet. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and good luck with all of your research. And all of your genetics.
Yeah, I need more luck for that right now.